I want to talk about our project and what we did, and I think Ellen brought together a group of people who, we knew each other, and there was a high degree of trust. And I think trust is something that's very important in this work, particularly around trying to change the narrative in our community, trying to, in a way, disrupt the status quo of how things are viewed or how things are done, and a recognition that we don't have all the answers, but the answers lie out there somewhere in the community. And so when we embarked on our project around resiliency, how can we support resiliency in our community? And in times of crisis or adversity, how do communities come together? How do groups of people come together? And rather than making assumptions or dusting off existing models or saying, okay, we're gonna do this and we're gonna we already have a plan, we felt it was important to first think about who are the groups that we normally don't connect with, and are there gaps, and what is our understanding of their understanding of what are the things that they need. And so as we thought about resiliency and about connecting groups, we felt it was important to go out and listen to the community and to suspend our way of doing business, because we're really good about engaging community, right? We craft the agenda, we put a time limit on it, we send the invite to the people we want to show up. We predetermine, in a way, an outcome by virtue of the kinds of questions that we ask. So in a way, we set the conditions for the kinds of responses that we get. And there's a lot of comfort in doing that. We go into community and we take. We take, but sometimes we don't leave anything behind. And so I want us to think about what can we do to stop being takers, and think about how we can build something together. And so it was a bit challenging, because we have a tendency to want to set an agenda and what's it going to look like. And so we trusted each other, and we said, look, we're just going to have a very loose structure. We're going to set a start time. And our first group, we wanted to really understand what are the needs of our indigenous community here in Sonoma County, particularly indigenous communities of farm workers from Mexico, because they have been displaced by a lot of turmoil in their own native country, where they've been persecuted and attacked by the government and by rich landowners, and so they've had to flee their country for a better life. But there's a lot of indigenous members of Mexico living in our community. 7 different languages are spoken, and so we reached out to Mariano, who's a member of the Triqui community, and we wanted to have a conversation about how do they navigate the system here in Sonoma County, and when they need support, who do they turn to, and what does that look like, and how can we build greater understanding about their needs. So I'm going to get into the learning sessions. The other thing is we're going to talk about the recommendations that we have come up with as a group, and then share with you that, in fact, there are already great examples in Sonoma County of where we're implementing some variation of the self-healing communities, and we want to amplify that if we want to really create these or to change the narrative and to adopt new habits that can move us all in that direction. And then we'll get into the actual habits that we're proposing. But regarding the listening sessions, and specifically with Triqui people, we set an agenda. We said we wanted to meet and better understand, and Mariano was a bit skeptical about, well, why do you want to meet with us? I said, well, we really want to. We know that food is a great uniter, brings people together. It's sort of, we're all on the same page when we sit down and eat food. And he said, well, let's start with just a meeting and maybe some coffee. So we did that. We invited them to come to a meeting in the evening, And Ellen and our group, we all pitched in. I brought bread, somebody brought coffee, somebody brought fruit, a little platter of vegetables, and we all had to pitch in ourselves because this is not something government funds. We can't pay for food, so but we know how important it is. So lesson number one, if we really want to understand the people, we need to align our resources to get better impact. But food is a great uniter, and we didn't sit in the way that we're sitting here. We felt it was important to remove barriers because we place barriers all the time. And so we eliminated the tables and we sat around in a circle. And the first order of business was not to get into a conversation about what do you need, but we wanted to understand and to share who are we and who am I. I am Oscar, and a little bit about my title, but who am I and why am I here? And so the idea here is really about building relationships and trust, because you really can't do this kind of work if you don't build understanding, trust, understanding of where people are coming from. And so we went around the room and we introduced ourselves, we learned a little bit about them, and as the conversation evolved, we got into the more intimate elements of what concerns we have, how we can best help. And we learned a great deal from this listening experience about what it's like to feel invisible in Sonoma County, what it's like not to speak Spanish in a country where English is a primary language, what it's like to experience discrimination because there's a pecking order even within different groups of people. And that was very insightful. And so how can you build trust? How can you outreach to people who have a different worldview of engagement if you don't understand? So the lesson here is that we have to be students of our students. We have to understand the needs of the community if we are to really effectively try to provide support. The other key takeaway was that they wanted to be acknowledged for the value that they bring. Oftentimes we label people as either high risk, at risk, people in need, and yes, there are needs, but they're not broken. I was once labeled a at risk, high risk, but there was nothing wrong with me. The environment I lived in, the immigration system, the legal system created a situation that put me in a position of risk, but I was fine. My parents were just poor, undocumented, and they just didn't have enough money. So I think we need to also think about the language we use in thinking about who are the people that we're trying to serve. And what they said is we need help, right? In our native country, we don't eat a lot of sugar, but everything here has tons of sugar. We see tremendous decay in the oral health of our community because we have to work so many hours. We don't have time to prepare the kinds of foods that we know are healthy. We know a lot about medicine that could be very helpful. Like, we have a lot of things to contribute, but the places that are receptive to that don't exist in our community. And that was a very important lesson for us to learn, that in thinking about resiliency, it's not about us trying to fix a group. And in fact, I would challenge us, and I would say that we have so much to learn from people who have been dealing with resiliency for thousands of years and who know what it means to have high level of trust and cooperation and mutual aid and benefit. In fact, I think we've lost that in our country because of this, deeply rooted belief in the individual, that we no longer value the importance of community. So to me, we learned so much more from the group we were trying to help, that I think that will be transformative in the way that we think about providing solutions. Very similar experiences with the Day Labor Center, where people identified needs. There's a high degree of of cooperation and support, but housing, as a primary issue. And so the lesson here is that as we think about what needs to be done in our community, that we have to move beyond this idea of trying to fix people and look at what are the conditions, what are those systemic challenges that create disproportionality in outcomes for the people that we're trying to serve. And so our work has to transcend trying to address the needs of individuals and to put front and center what are those structures that are getting in the way of people having success in our community. Ellen and the others participated in the Sustainability Enterprise Conference to really think about how do we build resiliency across different networks and groups, and how do we create those tables to be able to come together. And we came up with some of the key findings that I will go into. The takeaway, I think, for us is that there's a lot of great work happening in silos, and that we're not capitalizing on the collective will and wisdom of these various groups. At the same Sustainability Enterprise Conference last year, I had an opportunity to participate in a conversation about the Blue-Green Alliance. This is how do we get the environmental movement working with the labor movement, and there's another group, sort of the social justice movement. And if you think about issues around housing, that is an issue that cuts across all of those, the interest of all of those three groups. And imagine how powerful we would be if the labor community, the environmental community, the social justice community came together and advocated for housing for all, or for more housing, that we could in fact be a stronger group. And so the opportunity here is that we have the potential to think differently about how we're organized as groups, and how we build trust amongst groups, and how we set the table to bring more voices to this important conversation. Because the more we know together, and the more we build together, the more trust we can have. And when we have trust, we can get things done. The fact is that if you look at our community today, we are divided along race and class. And in a lot of tables, I see that we talk about the other. We make assumptions about the other. But what if the other and the other got together and really began to think about, well, what do we have in common? And when we can build that high degree of trust, I think we can get things done. So I think the work that we're trying to do here is really about movement building, and about inviting other perspectives, about recognizing that in the end, we all want the same thing. And that is that we want the place where we can, achieve our full potential, where our children are safe, where we, have high degree of trust, where we have, good safety, good environment, and that's really what we want to promote with this work. And so part of our recommendations from the work that we did is we felt it was important that we have to place equity at the center of our work, right? The Portrait of Sonoma that we published in 2014-13 really revealed that there is disproportionality in outcomes for different groups based on where you live, based on the level of education that you have, and that there's certainly outcomes in health. So we have to put equity at the center of our work. And there's a lot of organizations that are doing this work throughout the country. We like to point to Kings County in Washington. They developed an equity lens. They've got 14 recommendations or strategies where they don't just look at the well-being of the community, but they think about equity from an economic development perspective, equity from an environmental perspective. And what they're recognizing is that when you can address all of those things together, you accelerate the rate of change and you reduce disparities much faster over time than if you try to do it through a one-off or a very singular perspective. So we're learning a lot from them, and we recognize that equity has to be at the center of the work that we do in our community. That we need to build a general community capacity, and this is so important. You know, capacity building is so important. It's setting the tables for people to come together to struggle through these very challenging issues, and to think about what are those solutions that we can come up with collectively to create the change that we need. And when you think about it, as Ellen pointed out, the complexity, just the magnitude of the challenges that are before us, we really need the full participation of our community. We need to hear the diversity of perspectives to help us achieve better outcomes than we're currently achieving. And so capacity building has to be a commitment that we make, not just when we want to engage the community, but it has to be integrated into the infrastructure of what a healthy community looks like in order to have continuous improvement and to bringing new ideas and new perspectives to help strengthen the work that we want to do. Another recommendation is around building resiliency through connectedness. And this is so important, and there's sort of a yearning across everything that we do to better connect. I feel better when I have strong connections with people, but if you think about it, connectedness is not something that we do well at. We are, Ellen and I, also part of an initiative around aging together, where we have we know we have a rapidly growing aging population, and we're trying to think about how do we promote intergenerational connectedness so that our older people can have a connection with our younger people, and then what can we learn? And because we're so segregated in our community, those opportunities are few and far between. So that's something that we have to really think about. How do we create opportunities to help our communities, our neighborhoods, our different groups connect? And what do those tables look like? And whose responsibility is it to bring people together in ways that will allow us to honor a different perspective? And we want to look for common solutions that solve multiple problems. In the work that we did, we identified a lot of different strategies that are currently underway. And if you look at, one that we looked at, transportation impacts everybody. It impacts the community, it impacts the environment, it impacts the economy. So that is an area that we could rally around. What does good transportation mean for our senior population, for our low-wage worker population who have to travel longer distances? We are geographically isolated here in our community. What new or what kind of transportation system do we need to help reduce the number of miles that people drive? We also want to be concerned about the environment. We want to have fewer people driving. What new things could we do? So there are things that we can tackle as groups of people that benefit not only the community, the individuals, the environment, but also that are good for the economy. And so we want to identify what those things are, and we think that the framework and the lens that we're proposing locally can help us achieve better results, so that it's not the sole responsibility of one group or one entity who may not have the full picture of the needs of the community. So we find tremendous value in advancing these recommendations. So the other piece around connectedness is we talk a lot about building social capital. And we know how important that is. Your personal networks are important. We know that when we deal with our own adversity, when we have our own challenges, we have a group of people that we rely on. And as we talk about the people that we serve or who access services through Health and Human Services, and we know how important connections are, we know how important social networks are, that we don't have a strategy around helping people build their social networks. We give you a service. We give you a thing, a program that you have to do, that you have to fit in. But we know that power of connection is so important, because who you know matters, and who your circle is matters. So we need to think about, in addition to building strong networks and connectedness, how do we help people build their own social capital? Because in the long run, that is really the greater value proposition, and we know that that's so beneficial and healthy when people deal with challenges or adversity. So something we definitely want to promote. So these are examples of organizations that are already doing some variation of the principles, or these self-healing principles. We've got the North Bay Organizing Project, Daily Acts, On the Verge, Raíces Collective, Restorative Resources, Santa Rosa Together, Nuestra Voz. In some way, these organizations are already doing this work. You know, North Bay Organizing Project, they are an issues-based, they're a power-building organization. They come together around issues. The members together work to identify what are those issues that we want to tackle. So there's a common understanding about what is the issue that we're trying to address, and how do we mobilize not just our community, but how do we work with electeds and other institutions to help build support for the work that we want to do. So they're a really good example and are helping to lead this idea of building people power, right? Because that's something that we also don't talk about, is power. But power is so important because it determines who gets what. And when you think about issues of equity and we look at how communities are organized, I mean, those are decisions that somebody made. You know, they had an outcome, and that outcome resulted in communities being different. So, you know, I'm hopeful that through that same process, we can undo some of that and begin to build more equitable outcomes for groups and individuals. But MBOP is a good example of how they've been able to mobilize and really build that people power. A Daily Act is another great example. We certainly have learned a lot from Trathan about permaculture and about, you know, resiliency, and about how communities are coming together to learn about the value of growing your own food, about sharing, about building community, and how building community happens through the act of sharing, of learning, of recognizing that we have a lot more in common than we really think, right? And so Daily Acts and their Resiliency Hub, some new work that they're doing, is they're really teaching us how to come together, how to depend on one another, how to build high degree of trust and support. And so we want to ensure that there are more groups like Daily Acts, and we want to see more resiliency happening at the neighborhood level, more trust building, more intergenerational, more coming together along, you know, race and class, because we think that that is the way that our community would be stronger. And there's a lot of research behind this. You know, the work of Dr. Manuel Pastor, he's an economist, and he tells you that communities that have, you know, greater diversity in their workforce, greater diversity in their community, who are more inclusive, who have more connections, do better in the long run because they have a shared value, they have a shared understanding of what needs to get done. So all of these things that we do will not only strengthen the quality of life for the people that we serve, but are good for our economy in the long term. We have the On the Move, who launched a program called On the Verge. And On the Verge is a group of leaders in our community, and this really came about because there's a recognition that there's not a lot of diversity at leadership tables. When you look at our city councils, our government, our elected positions, we are the least politically diverse region in the state. When you look at major boards of nonprofits, of banks, of you name it, there's not a lot of diversity. And so groups like Los Cien and others, the Community Foundation, felt that it was important to begin to think about investing in a leadership pipeline to make sure that more diversity could be at these tables that make very important decisions about what our community look like. And I'm happy that Fermin in our office is here, and he is one of our community leaders who adapted the self-healing community principals to launch their own project as part of this leadership program. They do a project, and they've identified a need in the Latino community, and that is there's access to mental health, behavioral health services in a culturally appropriate way is a huge need in our community. And so their center is really about creating La Plaza, donde la cultura cura, a place where culture cures, right? Where we recognize that healing happens in the many ways, and through greater connections, through art, through engagement, through storytelling, and that's something we learned from the Triquis, is that they warned us that they're going to lose their culture in 10 years, and culture is so tied to their well-being, that language, that the plants, that the dress, the storytelling, the music is so central to their well-being. And we see that has emerged as well, particularly within the Latino community, because they come to this country and we're told that to be successful is to assimilate and to give up and to lose your culture. And yet we're learning that that's created a lot of challenges. We can be part of this community without losing our culture, a sense of who we are, a recognition that there are great Latino leaders, not just in this community, who have contributed significantly to this country, to the state, to this region. And for young people to hear and to know that is powerful. It transforms you, it changes you in ways that our current ways of healing don't get at. So I have great hope for the work that Fermin and his team is doing, really around grassroots healing that will have profound impacts in our community over time. We also see groups like Raíces Collective looking at how to work through art and through culture to, again, promote healing. And we're seeing a lot of grassroots organizations developing and coming together, and people recognizing that the system that we have today isn't meeting our needs. And so we're having to develop new ways of working together, of developing mutual aid and support. And I think those institutions that have resources, that have infrastructure, we can learn so much. And if we could adapt and even just tweak some of the work that we're doing, we could go a long way in helping as an equal partner or an ally in creating the kind of change that's necessary for the future. So Raíces Collective is another great example of how that is happening in our community. Okay, so that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to be with you today. And for us, we're going to continue to find opportunities to engage you and others in this work. So thank you again.